Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking into a really interesting idea in global affairs, soft power.
hmm
We're not talking about armies or, economic deals here. This is about how a country can influence others just by being attractive.
That's right. It's about the pull of its culture, its political ideals, maybe the legitimacy of its foreign policy.
And we know you, our listener, want to get up to speed on these big ideas pretty quickly and, well, properly.
Exactly. So this deep dive into soft power, especially looking at the U.S. experience, really gives you a vital lens for understanding how the world works and America's role in it.
Yeah, we've got some source material here that looks at American soft power over time and also through the lens of some more recent changes.
Mm.
So our mission today really is to unpack how this attraction thing works, where it comes from, and, well, what happens if it starts to fade.
Okay.
All right, let's get into it. When we talk about power like this, what are the basic kinds we should keep in mind?
Well, fundamentally, power is just about getting others to do what you want. And the sources break it down into two main types: hard power and soft power.
Okay.
Hard power is pretty straightforward. It's using coercion, the sticks, military threats, sanctions, or inducements, or the carrots like aid or trade deals.
Right, the tangible stuff, the immediate tool. So soft power is more subtle.
Exactly. Soft power is the honey. It's getting others to want what you want because they genuinely admire your culture or your political values, or they think your policies are legitimate.
Okay.
And this brings up that famous, maybe cynical quote attributed to Stalin: how many divisions does the Pope have?
Yeah, basically dismissing anything that isn't military muscle.
Right. But, if you look at the long game, the papacy's influence has lasted for centuries, while the Soviet Union, which relied heavily on hard power, well, it collapsed. It really highlights the potential staying power of soft power.
So, okay, if a country has this attractiveness, what are the real-world benefits? It's got to be more than just being popular, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. It makes a huge difference. Attractiveness means you don't have to rely so much on those costly sticks and carrots.
Mm-hmm.
When other countries trust you, see you as basically benign, they're just much more likely to cooperate, to listen to your ideas, to follow your lead. Their interests feel aligned with yours.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Easier to work with someone you respect.
Think about the Cold War again. The sources mention a historian calling the American sphere in Europe an empire by invitation.
Invitation, right?
Western European countries, for the most part, chose that alignment. Now, contrast that with the Soviet Union needing tanks to keep control: Budapest 56, Prague 68.
Big difference.
And you could even argue NATO's expansion since then, countries wanting to join, is a continuation of that same dynamic.
That's a really powerful contrast. One using force, the other attracting members. But, and this is important, soft power doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? Hard power still matters.
That's a really crucial point. Yeah, soft power on its own, often not enough. And it definitely takes time to build and have an effect. Machiavelli knew this, right? He basically said it's safer to be feared than loved, though ideally you'd be both.
The quick hit versus the long game.
Exactly. But relying only on hard power, on coercion and payments, that can get really expensive. Not just money, but breeding resentment, instability.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the Berlin Wall. It didn't fall because of an invasion. It fell because people on the eastern side lost faith in their system and were deeply attracted to what they saw in the West. The freedom, the opportunity. That was attraction winning out.
And a lot of that attraction, especially after World War II, was tied to this liberal international order the U.S. helped build, wasn't it?
Absolutely. After the war, the U.S. had enormous influence and used it to promote a global system based on its values. The UN, the World Bank, the IMF, Bretton Woods institutions. The idea was multilateral cooperation, democracy, free markets.
Although the source material is careful to point out, the U.S. wasn't always consistent with those ideals, and the Cold War split the world anyway.
No, definitely not always consistent. And the Cold War certainly limited the reach of that order. But the core point holds. Imagine if the Axis powers, with their very different values, had shaped the post-war world instead. It would look fundamentally different and arguably much less attractive to many.
Okay, let's shift to more recent times. The sources point to a significant change in attitude toward soft power in the U.S., specifically mentioning the Trump administration.
Yes, the analysis suggests that Donald Trump was perhaps the first U.S. president to openly question the actual value of soft power in foreign policy, not just de-emphasizing it, but seemingly rejecting its fundamental importance.
And the sources give examples, right? Like pulling out of agreements.
Exactly, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord, the World Health Organization. These are cited as prime examples. The thinking behind it, according to the source, seemed to favor a more transactional, maybe America First approach, less focused on shared values or global public goods, even when facing threats like pandemics or climate change.
So if a country like the U.S. starts to, let's say, actively downplay its soft power, what happens next? The source seems pretty clear on the potential downsides.
Yeah, the source lays out several likely negative effects. First, you risk eroding trust with your democratic allies and mentions examples like Denmark, Canada. Second, certain actions or rhetoric, maybe directed towards places like Panama, could stir up old fears about American imperialism in Latin America.
And it's not just government-to-government stuff either, is it? It hits the broader perception of the U.S.
Totally. Things like weakening USAA, which was set up specifically to build goodwill through development aid back in '61 by JFK, well, that damages the image of benevolence. Or silencing Voice of America, that arguably helps authoritarian rivals. Slapping tariffs on friends makes the U.S. look unreliable. And challenging things like free speech at home, that undermines your credibility as a champion of democracy abroad.
Meanwhile, as this is happening, the source notes that other countries, particularly China, have been consciously trying to boost their soft power.
That's right. Since about 2007, under Hu Jintao, China's leadership made it a specific goal to become more attractive globally. They clearly see the value in it.
But they face hurdles too, don't they? The source points out some big ones.
Yeah.
Given those issues, what are they actually doing to try and build that appeal?
Well, China has two main challenges here, according to the analysis. One is the territorial disputes it has with so many neighbors that creates friction. The other is the government's tight grip on its own society, the lack of free expression. That inherently limits its appeal for many. So to compensate, they often focus on, promoting traditional culture, funding Confucius institutes, investing heavily in infrastructure projects abroad, the Belt and Road Initiative, and trying to position themselves as a leader on certain global issues, like climate change, ironically enough sometimes.
And how do we even track something like national attractiveness?
Yeah.
The source mentions opinion polls.
Yeah, public opinion surveys across different countries are one key way. They ask people how favorably they view various nations. These polls give us a rough measure.
Okay.
And the source raises a really important question. How might those numbers change if American soft power keeps getting chipped away?
It's a critical point. Because, as the source also notes, U.S. soft power has dipped before. Think Vietnam or the Iraq War.
Exactly. Those were definite low points. But they also show that American soft power can be resilient. It doesn't just come from the government. It comes from society, from culture.
Right. It's broader than just policy.
Think about the civil rights anthem, We Shall Overcome. That song, an American cultural product, was sung in protests against the Vietnam War around the world. That's cultural soft power persisting, even when government policy is deeply unpopular.
So the culture can endure even when the politics are messy. But the big question the source leaves hanging is, can that cultural appeal survive if the governmental side of soft power stays weak for a long time? That seems like the key uncertainty.
It really is. And look, the source does suggest American democracy itself is probably resilient enough to weather a particular political period. It points to the political culture, the Constitution, checks and balances, potential shifts in elections like 2026, a strong civil society, independent courts, even market reactions.
So the system itself might endure.
Possibly. But recovering lost soft power, that's different. As the source concludes, trust, once broken, is really hard to rebuild.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
We've seen it happen. Look at Russia's soft power after the invasion of Ukraine. It just plummeted. And China, as we mentioned, is actively looking to increase its own influence, potentially filling any void the U.S. leaves. Xi Jinping talks about the East rising over the West.
Right. So this analysis suggests that a strategy of weakening your own alliances, pulling back from international engagement, well, it seems likely to backfire, especially with the global challenges we face.
It seems that way based on this perspective, and trying to claw back that lost trust, that attractiveness later on, it's likely to be much, much harder and more costly than maintaining it in the first place.
It's definitely not impossible, as the source says, but costly.
Costly, yes.
Well, this has been a fascinating look at soft power, what it is, why it matters, and the risks of letting it slide. So for you listening, maybe think about this. What parts of American culture or its values or its policies do you think have the biggest impact, positive or negative, on its global appeal?
hmm And maybe also consider, with power shifting around the globe, how might different countries change their own soft power tactics in the years ahead?
Lots to think about.
Absolutely. Understanding power in all its forms,
Yep.
hard, soft, smart, it's just essential in our world today. It's about more than just force. It's also about that quiet but incredibly potent power of attraction.